this poem, Surplus Value, by David C. Ward. It's an interesting poem about history, economics, society. Some really interesting themes in this one. So I'll kind of start with the themes, I think, if I go through all the little... There we go. Yeah, so it's kind of set in America in a city called Detroit. So I recommend kind of reading up a little bit about Detroit and its history. It's a very rich, complex history of the place, and it's gone through cycles of being, a really huge, economically successful city full of industry, and then also economic slumps where the industry closes down and there's no work to be found, and everybody kind of has to adjust to that. So people live at different points in Detroit's history, in times of prosperity and then poverty as well. So we get to see a little bit of the history of Detroit, and also the mechanisms of capitalism and the way that the economy works in American culture through the example of the figure in the poem. So the first thing I want you to do is read the poem aloud to yourself. I can't read it because it's still in copyright. So yeah, if you just pause, look at the poem, read it aloud. And you'll notice that there's a lot of vocab there that is perhaps quite, industry specific. Like he uses a kind of industrial register. There's a lot of different words that are also kind of Americana related, so they relate specifically to American culture. So a lot of these words I've just put here for you as vocab, so you can have a look through and make sure that you understand what all of these mean, and then read the poem aloud to yourself. So yeah, we're going to have a look at what's going on in the story first. So it's a speaker who we can assume is the poet himself, speaking about his brother-in-law. So this is a kind of biographical poem that gives us a vignette into the life of this man who is the brother-in-law of the speaker, who is the poet himself. So he worked in car factories, and he was a specialist. He was what they call a tool and die guy, so a special type of machine operator. And there's a lot of car industry at one point in Detroit, so this was a kind of common sort of work trajectory to fall into for that city. He's described as a short, angry man with thick fingers and scarred hands, so he's quite kind of rough and ready, quite salt of the earth. He's got a lot of interests at first, which are supported by his work. So he rides a motorbike, a specific type of motorbike called a Harley Softail. He drinks Iron City, which is a certain brand of beer. And he has a house that he's mostly built himself, so he's a practical, physical worker who works really hard to provide for his family and has enough disposable income to pursue a few different interests and kind of hobbies alongside the work that he does. So this is the heyday of Detroit metal production. So he's got an abundance of work available, and he's working overtime. He has fair pay because the workers' unions, which are companies that campaign on behalf of the workers to make sure they have fair rights. He can have steak dinners. He has a cabin which he buys on a lake upstate, so like a holiday house that he uses for hunting and trips. And he takes pride in his work and in his kind of American identity. I know it's kind of ironic as an English person doing a poem that's very American, specifically American, but all of the poems in the collection that I'm doing at the moment, they're actually from around the world, and it's important with poetry that you understand the different cultures that they come from and the different sort of environments and contexts in which they were produced. So regardless of wherever your poems are from, it's always good to know quite a lot about the world that they're talking about, because that helps the poem to make a lot more sense. So yeah, he has 20 years of happiness. He works really well. The union gets destroyed and kind of corrupted. The companies are eroded because of a sort of like consumerist, materialist attitude, perhaps, where the owners of these companies are trying to make more and more profit, and it's resulting in less and less fair pay. And exploitation starts to happen where the men are working as hard as they've ever worked, but for a lot less of a reward than they've ever had. So, at first he had money to spare, and he could buy treats and kind of, build his own life outside of work. But he goes from an economy of scale where he's building things up to an economy of scarcity, where he is basically in poverty. He's in a situation where he can't live well. And then he started taking on extra work to make extra money, but then he ends up on the dole, which is when the government gives you money because you've not got a job, you've lost your employment. And so everything that he's built out of his life, by the end of the poem, it all has to be sold off because he can't afford to maintain it, and he perhaps needs the extra money from the sales in order to live. So his bike goes, his house, his cabin, holiday house goes. He has food stamps, which is basically like tickets that you exchange for food that you get when you're living in poverty and you're on the dole and you need a bit of help. He only buys essentials, not luxuries. He gets quieter as time stretched ahead, and his body physically starts bending and bowing and decaying under the weight of the burden that he's bearing, that he's no longer a successful breadwinner for his family. He's no longer able to support himself. He loses his sense of integrity and his strength and his, conviction in himself. So he becomes quite a dejected, broken person by the end of the poem. So it's a really sad little vignette, a sad portrayal of someone's life, that they didn't do anything wrong specifically. They worked very hard. They are, in a sense, self-made. They're kind of building themselves up. They're investing in things like extra property. They have a decent sort of balance in their life. And through no fault of their own, when mechanisms far greater than themselves that are outside of their control start breaking down, the after effects of that impact their life to a point where they end up destitute and broken. And it's, all of this material stuff that he has disappears, but it's more the effect on his, we could say his soul or his psyche is more damaging. He's lost all of his sense of self-worth and confidence by the end of the poem. So he's a synecdochic example. He's a form of synecdoche, which is where a part represents a whole. He's just one guy that this happened to. But we see that this happens over and over in the city of Detroit because the situation with the industry that is impacting him, that has a knock-on effect to everyone involved in that industry. And because that's one of the main economic forces in the city, the impact on the people that live there is kind of universal. Everyone suffers the same hardship and difficulty. Everyone will have their own stories of suffering and being reduced to an economy of scarcity. So it's a very tragic tone. There's a sense of helplessness. There's a sense that the poet really respects and appreciates this man and can't do anything to help him except tell his story. So there's quite a lot of different language features here that you can have a look through in your own time, and also quite a lot of structural features. So the main thing structurally is that it's a dramatic monologue. It's a sort of single stanza spoken from a poetic persona that basically tells the story of something. There's a volta very clearly with this sentence, but that road ran out. So it's almost like he's riding a wave, and the wave is swelling and increasing at one moment, and the next moment it kind of bursts and leaves him kind of adrift. That's sort of the feeling that you get with it, or that he's going down one road, everything's going very well, that road ends, and the new roads that he's forced to take are a lot less desirable. So yeah, it's quite sad. There's these metaphorical and physical scars that he has that grow deeper as he ages, because he feels like he's failed in life. So contextually, there's a lot of information here about both David C. Ward, the poet, and Detroit. You can pause and kind of read through if you like. So the main thing is understanding the history of America to a point where you get kind of the kind of capitalist sort of undercurrents that drive American industry and American business, and the way that those have both a positive and negative impact on the individuals there. So in academia generally, there's quite a common trend of being hyper anti-capitalist at the moment, and I'm not personally as vociferously anti-capitalist as other people may be. So I feel like you could blame the sort of industries and the superpowers that have control over the individuals. And I wouldn't necessarily personally blame capitalism itself, but it depends on your views on capitalism and, socialism and alternatives to capitalism, whether you believe in those or not. So there's definitely socioeconomic problems going on. They're driven by big companies trying to squeeze profits increasingly out of the businesses that they run, and then running into trouble themselves and then closing down. All of this kind of slowly choking the life and the enjoyment out of the people of Detroit. So we've got this sense of 1945 is when it starts becoming a car manufacturing city. But in the late 1900s, there's a lot of different things that kind of build up, which destroy this reputation of Detroit. And today as well, it still has severe economic problems. A very fascinating city to kind of read and learn about. Some beautiful, amazing houses in Detroit that they were selling a few years ago, I think for $1 each if you lived in them and renovated them yourself. So like the city itself is struggling so much that it's just selling off the property to anyone that will buy it, as long as they maintain it, because otherwise it's going to fall into disrepair. It's kind of the state that it's got to. There's a criticism of large corporations that are kind of faceless entities that don't have any personal connection to their workers, and therefore just see them as kind of ways to make more money. There's a sort of criticism of the way that, the middle classes who are business owners have corrupt systems in place that then impact the working classes, who have no way to kind of defend themselves against that system. So he has an economy of scale at first. He is able to increase personal wealth and accrue assets, which is central to a capitalist mentality. He's able to build his own kind of American dream. It's quite important that you know what the American dream is, so make sure that you kind of understand that as an idea. It's basically the idea that any individual in America can go from any starting point in life and build themselves up as far as they would like to go, and end up as rich as they want to be, as successful as they want to be. They have a right to be as free as they can imagine themselves being. And so the American dream mentality is a fundament of American culture, but it's also highly criticized, and many people think it's not really realistically achievable. It's too idealistic, and it pressurizes especially working class men into thinking that they're able to rise above situations that really it's an unrealistic expectation for them. So we could see that as a sort of message inherent in this poem, because this guy sort of does everything right in terms of the American dream. He starts to expand his assets. He owns property, he builds a house, he buys a cabin, and then through no fault of his own is forced to scale back. So a couple of attitudes and beliefs here again, a criticism of corporations, large companies, also the types of decisions made by large companies. If they go wrong, that impacts every individual that works for them. And also the idea that economy in general impacts individuals in particular. So when the economy of a city or country is going well, individuals can thrive and they have scope to expand and improve their lives. But when the economy starts failing or crashing, that has a sort of knock-on negative impact on the workers or on the individuals within that society, which is true to a lesser and greater extent depending on your kind of beliefs around economics. So with this one, he's very much, because of his background in education, he has one specialist type of training, one specialist set of skills, and he can only really thrive in an environment that is aligned with the skills that he's developed as an individual. So as soon as that industry is destroyed, there's no other options for him. He can't diversify and find other ways to make a living, and therefore ends up on the dole. So it's very tragic, and it creates a sense of pathos for the individual. And we feel for him, even though we've only just met him a few minutes ago. So I would recommend doing these little exercises because they help you open up the poem a little bit more, and practice planning or writing one of these essay questions too. Hopefully you're feeling a lot more confident on this poem. I would also research sort of the benefits and pitfalls of capitalism and the difference between consumerism, materialism, large corporations, small businesses. It's quite important to understand economics for life. I really didn't know anything about money until my mid-20s, and it probably wasn't a good idea. So I started reading economics books and learning about them when I was kind of around 25, 26, and it made a huge difference to my life and my life choices and that kind of thing. So I always just recommend to anyone that I have any contact with to give themselves at least a basic financial education and an education in economics, because it's really helpful. So that will help you make more interesting and deep analyses on this poem, but it will also just be good for your general life as well. So hopefully you've enjoyed this little introduction to David C. Ward and also the poem Surplus Value. If you need any more help, you can go to scribbly.com for downloadable resources, videos, courses, that kind of thing. And thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys soon.